Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's Google Hangout with our CX experts. Today, our topic is going to focus on voice of the customer, customer insight, and customer understanding. And to get the conversation started, I'm going to pass it off to our experts, and I'm going to start quite high level today so all of us have a starting point. And the question I'd like to ask, and perhaps Diane, we can start with you, but what are some emerging trends and some leading edge ideas that are happening in the world of voice of the customer and customer understanding? What's out there that you can get us excited about?
Terrific. Well, I think there's a lot happening in our space. One, I think people are realizing that the voice of customer, getting information from the customer, is a touch point in and of itself. So designing more mobile surveys, shorter surveys, looking for places to put more unsolicited feedback rather than it being surveys, letting customers serve when they want, how much they want to be involved in providing feedback to the organization. So that's been a huge trend. I think that customers have been more involved in what I'll call co-creation. In other words, they're really contributing more now than ever before in different ways to how the organization goes. The other big trend, I think, is we're seeing a two-way conversation rather than it being getting information from the customer and not responding. Things like closed loop happen, but what we see happening now is that ongoing dialogue between the customer and the organization. So those are some of the trends that we see that are really exciting because it allows us to get richer information and really make it a touch point that the customers want to be involved with for the organization.
Wonderful. And then also on the line today we have Jim and Jim. And so I'll let you guys introduce yourselves and then pick up from there with what Diane said. So how about we start with Jim Rambachan and then go to Jim Tincher?
Thank you very much. I don't know about introducing myself. I mean, you guys can find that stuff out on my LinkedIn page. That gets kind of boring. I'd like to append and add on to what Diane was saying, in that if you kind of look at the underlying elements of all the things that she was talking about, which are emerging trends, I think you could easily group that into what I refer to as the neuroscience of VOC, the neuroscience of the customer experience. And that's opening up a whole new train of thought that we have never experienced before when you start looking at the individual departments that may have been associated or responsible for the voice of the customer and making changes within the organization. So I think that the neuroscience piece is important. And then in order for you to really capture and take advantage of this neuroscience concept within CX and VOC, there's a couple things that have to occur. And I like making little slides, even on our Google Hangouts, so there's a couple that I've made for us to talk about. And one of the things that we really need to shift our mindset in is that understanding that knowing makes learning impossible. And think about that. If we know something, that means it makes it extremely difficult for new ideas to be let in because we stop ourselves. I mean, we all in our brains like shortcuts. So if we're thinking about the neuroscience perspective, we can't stop at, oh, I know that, and because it's going to stop the ideas from coming in. Now, one of the downsides to that is we have what is referred to as the Bermuda Triangle of VOC ideas. So we capture all this information from forums, peers.
Hey, Jim, would you hold that slide up? Jim, would you hold that slide up a little more? Your name is getting in the way.
This one?
Yes, please. Thank you.
So the Bermuda Triangle of VOC ideas. So we capture all this information, and we have all these ideas, and then we have these endless meetings, and it creates a lot of problems for us. We just end up essentially stirring a whole lot of ideas and having the inability to take some action. So the other thing is knowing that emotional intelligence is greater than our actual rote intelligence or intelligence associated with that knowledge piece. So we have to know that from the perspective that we need to open up the door and not close it and focus on the emotion, and know that action begets action. So you have to go where the action is. It's kind of like what Diane was talking about, in that capturing the information from the different sources and touch points and really using that. So the high-performing VOC mindset is really around knowing, actually being the enemy of learning, and that we need to detect the emotion, and we need to go where the action is. And if those are your underlying pieces, it'll open up a wealth of opportunities like Diane was mentioning that we're seeing as emerging trends.
Wonderful. Jim, Tincher?
All right, Jim Tincher, Heart of the Customer. And what I'm seeing is really, surveys have traditionally been the way that this has been done. And it's kind of the easy way to go about and to get feedback. But in some respects, it's also the lazy way. Yes, you need it. It's important to have a baseline, to have a measurement, but surveys by themselves aren't enough. And so I've been starting to collect some different ideas people are doing. And so I don't have the nifty slides that Jim Rambach has, but I do have a show and tell, which is something that I found when I was at the Washington Airport with Mara Bain, the Chief Experience Officer at Western National. And she and I ran across a different way of getting feedback, which I don't know if you can see this so well, but it's from my iPad. It's a picture of how clean is this restroom. And it's a 4-button from dirty to clean on the restroom. Interesting way of getting feedback until Mara pointed out that there's no way she's going to touch buttons that were placed right outside of a restroom. So I got that, and I don't know if that specific implementation is really what I'd recommend. But it's going beyond just your typical what's your Net Promoter Score and pulling other ways. We had a fascinating local networking event here locally where we had 3 members. We had somebody from GE Capital, Fleet Solutions, their VP of Customer Experience. We had Lori Laughlin, who's in charge of measuring customer experience from Cargill. And then lastly, we had the president of Great Clips. And he's interesting because they don't use surveys at all. They use pure operational data, which is backed by a lot of qualitative, and they actually bring in the operations. And that's something that I'm starting to see happening only in mature locations, is let's not rely just on surveys. Let's bring in the operational data. The surveys may give us a little bit more idea why, but the operational tells us what. And a mature program is really bringing in that operational data. And where I find people fighting that is it's really hard sometimes to get. It's all throughout the organization. You'll find it in sales, you'll find it in marketing, you'll find it in operations, all over the place, but it's often hard to get them to share. But if you don't bring in the operational data, you're really missing some of that rich feedback and what's really happening. And you can fool yourselves with surveys as saying you're doing really well or really badly, but it's only once you bring in the operational data that actually get the context how you're really doing.
Jim, I think that's a great point. I think the combination of what customers say to us and tell us how they feel and bringing in how they're actually behaving is a really powerful combination. It is difficult to do, though, right? There's so many sources of information, but I think you have to start very cohesively. We kind of have a mantra of saying, what's the business question we're trying to answer? Why are customers leaving us, or why are they buying more, or where are they getting stuck, right? So we start with that and say what data can help us understand that. So I completely agree with you. I think you have to look at that because surveys don't obviously tell you everything you need to know. The behavior will tell you a lot more. And then to Jim's point, I agree. The other trend that we're seeing is asking a lot more about how people are feeling about the interaction instead of just transactional satisfaction type scores. It's really, did we help you avoid risk? Do you have brand affinity? What keeps you loyal to us? It's really getting to more of that emotional side, which I know Jim is very passionate about. So that's another big trend that we see happening in more the human side of VOC.
Very much so. Both of you guys kind of hit a place for me that I've seen kind of neglected in my 20 years of being responsible for, helping and being part of leading, the customer experience, and that is the contact center in many organizations is kind of a hub of a lot of interactions and a lot of emotions. And yes, of course, a lot of transactional data and operational data. And I have seen over and over again the information that is available in there just being totally overlooked. It is a wealth of information and insight. One of the issues being is that, and what I find is, I'm oftentimes having conversations with people who aren't familiar with contact center and contact center operations and trying to help them understand the difference between market research related type of customer insight and VOC versus customer experience and interaction type of VOC. They're not the same. It's kind of like going to a podiatrist for your ear, nose, and throat problem. I mean, it's just a different type of discipline, a different type of animal. But I think also that's part of the contributing factor in what has made the contact center a place where it's just virgin soil. I mean, there's so many opportunities there. So, that would be definitely one of the suggestions that I would make is go where the action is. The action for many is in the contact center, and the VOC folks just aren't there.
Well, and part of that, I think, comes across that there's a tendency in the CX world to say we're not customer service. And the easiest way to make that claim is to have nothing whatsoever to do with the customer service department. And so you're right, that tends to trying to downplay a lot of that real data that's out there that's actually telling you what your customers are saying in a very real touch point. But typically by trying to disassociate yourself with that, you're missing out on a real opportunity to learn. Sorry, Diane, to cut you off.
No, it's funny that you say that too, Jim, because in the contact center, people will say, if you start talking about call center, well, we're not a call center. We're customer service. Well, yeah, I mean, really? I mean, peel back, the name, and still look at what you actually have available to you.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those are all really fantastic pieces of insight for us to take back to our organizations, challenge the way we think about where we collect our data. Is it at a neuroscience level? Are we looking at emotional cues? Are we taking operational feedback and marrying that with our perception feedback? Those are all fantastic charges and I think great challenges for us. My question that I would ask now for you to help us understand is, what are some of the common missteps we might take as we pursue these new sources of insight and understanding? And given those pitfalls, what recommendations could you leave us with to avoid those mistakes?
Let's see. The common pitfall I run across a lot is going with what's easy. Going with what data is right in front of you and saying, okay, that'll tell us the story, instead of really looking at it through your customer's eyes. My hammer I use is journey maps that we focus on, but I find it's a really good way if you start with a customer-created journey map, from using that as a way to measure what's really important. And often what's the easiest data to get isn't the most impactful. It doesn't really speak to what's going on. So you need to start with, from your customer's eyes, what are those moments of truth? And if you don't easily have the data, that's where you first need to focus. And often I'll find people who want to start by bringing another survey, but let's first start with what is it that the customers value? What do we know today? What can we get? And only then do you start talking about new data collection.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think that the issue has really changed much. I find a lot of practitioners struggle with, great, we got all this great voice of customer information, but we don't really know how to convert it to insights and convert it to action in a way that makes sense, right? It's like they kind of automatically jump to, oh, we know what's causing that problem, and go fix it. And I think you're absolutely right. Journey mapping can help you kind of take a different look, seeing what's happening upstream that's causing the problem, or things that are going on in the ecosystem that are creating that. And I think that's one of the things that learning how to develop insights, how to prioritize and convert those to actions, and really understanding the issue and looking at it more holistically helps people get from what I call so what, right? You got all this great information, so what? What are you going to do with it? So that's always a sticking point for new practitioners. They're not quite sure how to take all that great information and figure out what to go do about it. They have to resort to the easiest things and identifiable things they know have always been pain points. So really digging in is helpful. And journey mapping, as you said, is one way to do that. There's a lot of great resources out there. Luma Institute has some great, if you want to go check that out, LUMA, has some great techniques you can use. So we try to really educate our folks about how to use that information in a different way.
And the other problem I find is afterwards, you talked about all that rich data out there, the easy thing, and because we're typically, a CX person's a data head, at least have some level of understanding data. They love to take their research and talk about what the research means. But where they typically fall down is the storytelling. You take all that data and you say, okay, well, you see slide 73. What it tells us clearly is, and say, well, no, get rid of slide 73. How about slide 5? And really talk about what's the story here. Yes, you need slide 73 for some of the data folks, and you got to have that. But really, to tell the story, what's there. In my blog, I interview a lot of CX leaders, and that's been a theme this year, is around taking all that information, but finding what's in the story underneath that and sharing that story, and then backing it up with visual storytelling. Mara, again, one of the things I love that she does is they have a put yourself in your customer's shoes campaign where they're collecting their customer's shoes and putting them on the wall. So you walk down that hallway, there's all these shoes there with the customer story behind them, and they're literally telling the customer stories as seen by their shoes. And just different ways to to tell that story more effectively than yet another chart in PowerPoint.
Mm-hmm.
And you guys introduced exactly why I love empathy mapping. Is it's very easy to map out a journey from a process perspective, and you get somewhat of an idea of what the customer may feel going through that process. But until you really start peeling back and looking at the things associated with the emotional intelligence, where empathy is really just one of the 54 emotional intelligence competencies, and there's other things that interrelate with one another that will really give you the ability to create a story faster, and then also know what you need to do as a result of the stories that you're finding, and then see how you're interplaying with that. So a lot of times we think, customer emotion, but it's also our emotion. One of the things I talk a lot about is a corporate arrogance. The reality is that we all have it. The key is being able to make sure that we minimize it as much as possible, because that's when, from a customer's perspective, it starts coming out as you're just a pain in the you-know-what to do business with. And a lot of times,
well, that comes back. You're right. A poor journey map is about a process, but it's really what you want to get across is that emotion. What's going on? What are they really thinking, feeling, saying, doing as they go throughout that journey? Empathy map is a great way of accomplishing that as well. But it really comes back to, from your customer's eyes, what are they doing today? Because that's how you measure. If their frustration is to get your product and they can't use it, then you need to measure something along those lines and tie into where are your customers' emotions and how can you make those better.
well, I find a lot of times that for the falling down point is that self-actualization and self-awareness from an organizational perspective is where a lot of groups can really have difficulty being able to see. And we all experience this in our own lives. I mean, we know our own four walls, but oftentimes stepping outside of that, is really where we can see what's going on inside. And it's hard to do.
So let me hop in here real quick, and first of all, thank you guys for the great recommendations you're giving us around not leaving too far from our customers' experience, be that emotional or operational, and really sticking to the basics per se in a means to collect in these new sources of data. Beyond journey mapping, are there any other recommendations you could give us? As I liked Jim Tincher's comments about all of us being data heads, and we kind of chase these big seas of data. We live in a big data world. It's the information age. It's almost as if there's too much. What are some recommendations you could give us to finding the data that's right for us? Not all data is equal, especially when we're all in different organizations. Could you give us any insight on how to go about identifying what that right data is? I mean, does that make sense as a question?
It does. I actually, oddly enough, I'm getting ready to go speak at a conference board meeting about this particular very issue, and there's tools that I use in order to help organizations find those particular metrics. So without getting too deep in the weeds and all of that, a lot of times the metrics that we have we inherit, or we go back to that triangle thing that I was talking about. Hey, what are you measuring? Hey, what are they measuring? Hey, and we start just pulling those ideas and never really create our own DNA with it. And that's a lot of times what we have to do is we kind of have to re-engineer or dissect what they currently have in place. We have to take like 3 steps back in order to be able to go forward. And oftentimes they do find that the particular metrics they are using will continue to work just well, and sometimes they have to get rid of them. But that is a process that takes a while, and it does require a framework and tools to be able to do it.
Anyone else, Diane or Jim?
Well, in some respects, it's almost to follow the money, although it's following the customer's money in terms of where are the challenges, then where are they investing in you, where are they using you. That's what you want to know. And often, some of the most important data is actually not within your organization. It's what's happening. If you're looking at a sales journey, for example, and how people want to buy, what's happening in Google. What are the searches that are out there? What's happening with association? Where are they finding their information outside of your walls? And can you measure that? If we find, for example, I'm working right now with a company that understanding a journey, we find it's incredibly word of mouth and focused on conferences. That's how people learn, not from the sales literature, not from the websites. And so can you track that? Can you try to find information going on there and how you're doing on there? How many of those conversations are you part of? How many of the conferences are you attending? How many meetings are happening at conferences? Meetings at conferences is not, for example, an intuitive data point to put up there on your scorecard. But if that's, you know, what your customers' value is, they love learning at conferences and meeting people at conferences, then that's absolutely how you need to measure yourself. Really looking at it again is what you know from your customers and how they want to interact, and often it's not the easy data. It's a lot easier to say how many clicks we got on our website than it is to say how many meetings did we have at the certain conference.
Yeah, I completely agree with both Jims that you're going to have to start with that business question and really figure out what it is you're going to measure and how are you going to understand if you've had an impact on that, right? It kind of comes down to that question. Whether that's, you know, for B2B, for example, lots of people struggle with Net Promoter Score because is there really a referral to be had there? So you really have to look at, is it more of an effort score or something to that metric? But back to your conversation about gathering information, I agree with you, Jim, that I think we have this omni-brand experience now, right? It's not just omni-channel for inside an organization. That customer is touched by many brands even as they interact with us, right? So we have to be cognizant and aware of all those other touch points that are happening and how those are influencing their touch point with us, right? So if it's a example there, right, is if you're trying to get to a website and you think the website is kludgy, it could be just your connection speed, right? So you assume that the problem is with the website itself when it's your connection. So you have to really look at and understand what the customer is going through at that time. So we do a lot of immersion work where we're going and doing ethnographic research, sitting beside customers, watching what they do and how they do it, right? That's another great way to get and have them talk out loud. That's another great way for them to share what they're thinking and feeling at the time. So, and it doesn't have to be long and involved. It can be just 4 or 5 customers, and you kind of get the idea of what they're going through. So that's another great technique for folks to gather and append what they have from surveys or other feedback. They can really go and discover what's happening with the customer.
Well, and following up with that, where I thought you were going to go, Drew, is how do you actually, once you figure out the right metrics, how do you tell that story effectively, or how do you communicate it? And Diane, tying into what you just said there, is we find that one of the best ways of putting the data in a meaningful context is through video. And one of the great outcomes of that ethnography work is if you can actually get a video of people saying things. What I found is I can say something 100 times, but if I have your customer saying one thing, that's a lot more impactful. And so we use a lot of video and work with our clients to include video to tell that story. It puts real meaning behind the data that's there. And ethnography is a great way of collecting that. Great.
Yes, I totally agree.
So hey, we just had a question come in from the audience, and I wanna ask this to you guys. It goes back to the conversation around self-awareness and getting outside of the 4 walls of your organization. How do you do that? How do we get out of ourselves and step back? And not just ourselves in our own roles, but how do we encourage more than just ourselves to get out and to critically look at our organization? Do any of you guys have some tips and strategies for breaking down those walls and expanding our vision of ourselves?
We've used a technique called Customer for a Day, and it's not necessarily for a day, but we ask our associates to try to do what the customer's trying to do as if they were in their shoes, so as Jim, so to speak. So it gives them a flavor for exactly what that customer's going through, and that helps them get outside, coming in, and as I say, getting on the gerbil wheel and just doing their work and thinking this is just an interaction with this customer and they don't exist after that. It really helps them to understand the need, the want, how they might be feeling, what actually happens as they go through that process. So that's a way that we get not only that ethnographic research and understanding, but we get associates to understand what's happening, putting them through the actual scenario that a customer might go through, good, bad, or indifferent.
John Deere Finance has a great program. Brittany Whittier up here in the cities leads it, where they take the executives out to visit the farmers, and they put on jeans and they work on the farm for a day. And she has a big backlog of executives who want to go out there and really get the hands-on work. And she found that that's one of the best ways to really start driving customer-focused change is get them in jeans to work on a tractor. Get them to feed pigs, maybe. I don't know if they do that for sure, but I thought so. But yeah, get them out there and see that. It's, first of all, being your own customer, but second of all, living with your customers for a while. And so they spend a full day out in the farm. And it's a great way to break away. You know, you're probably not answering your phone out there while you're working on the tractor. And instead, you're really immersed in the customer's environment.
I mean, for me, it goes back to what I was mentioning earlier about the high-performing VOC mindset. It's, you know, first of all, knowing is the enemy of learning, so that you have to measure. I mean, in order to be able to understand and be more self-aware, you have to measure properly, and a lot of times that's just not done. You know, you have to detect the emotional pieces associated with, you know, connecting both internally and getting intrinsic motivation and drive, and externally as well, and then go where the action is. You know, put an executive in overalls and put them on the farm. You know, get to the contact center and capture some of this data. I mean, go where the action is.
And it's really hard to do that because you think, I'm so busy. I'm so busy, I can't find time for this. I hear that all the time. Yet A.G. Lafley, CEO of Procter & Gamble, I mean, that's a busy guy. And every month he goes and talks to consumers. He finds the time. And so when people say, I don't have time, you know, Rhoda Olson, CEO of Great Clips, visits 400 salons a year. Somehow she finds the time. And if those two can find the time, well, then we can too. It's very easy to say, I'm busy doing this thing and the other thing. But are you doing what really matters, which is getting out there and literally talking to your customers?
So I think that is the perfect close for our conversation today. Nothing beats being there, and I think all of those stories that quite large companies and their CEOs are doing to go be with the customer is plenty of inspiration, at least for me, to go out and listen to the customer, and I hope it is for everyone on the line. Our time is up for today, and before we go, I want to encourage everybody to mark their calendar for next month, the last Wednesday. It's March 25th. The topic will be organizational adoption and accountability. So please mark your calendar. We will have the same group of experts, more or less. We love having everyone that joins. Diane, thank you very much. Jim and Jim, wonderful conversation today. I hope everyone out there on the other side of the dialogue enjoyed it. Next time, please bring some questions if you have any. Other than that, we really appreciate everyone's time here, the experts, and we hope to see you guys next month. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Drew.